The axe was still buried in the log when the screaming started. Owen Morgan straightened from his crouch, wood shaving stuck to his forearms, and looked up toward the mountain road that coiled above the tree line. The sound rolled down through the pines in waves, not the clean, short cry of an injured man, but the long, ragged noise of a crowd turning ugly. He had heard that sound once before, years ago, at a hanging in Veldren Market Square, and it had turned his stomach then the same way it did now. He wiped his hands on his trousers, pulled his jacket from the fence post, and started up the slope. He was a woodcutter by trade and by birth, working the forest shelf below the walled monastery town of Ashmark, a strange, half-wild place bolted to the mountainside like something that had decided not to fall. 3,000 people lived behind those old stone walls, most of them stonecutters, merchants, pilgrims, and the rough soldiers who served the prior governor. Owen was none of those things. He had a log cabin at the tree line, a good axe, a contract with the monastery's furnace rooms, and not much else. He was 31 years old. He had heavy shoulders, a plain, honest face, and brown eyes that his mother had once said were too earnest for a man who planned to get anywhere in this world. She had probably been right. He reached the east gate just as the crowd spilled out of it. The problem was standing in the middle of the road, and she was not small. The orc woman stood easily 6 feet, built in the long-limbed, powerfully muscled way of the warrior clans that roamed the Ashwood lowlands 3 days south of here. She wore fitted travel leathers, deep brown, laced up the front of the bodice with black cord that followed the line of her figure all the way to her belt, where 2 short blades rested in worn sheaths. Her trousers were tucked into knee-high boots. A bracer on her right forearm was etched with a clan mark Owen did not know. Her skin was the dark gray-green of river slate, and her hair was black as charcoal, pulled back from her face and pinned with a bone clasp. Her tusks were modest by clan standards, barely a thumb's length above her lip, and her eyes, which were currently measuring the crowd in front of her with the calm and unhurried patience of someone who had survived much worse, were the color of amber glass. She was, Owen thought quite suddenly and unhelpfully, extraordinary looking. The crowd did not share his opinion. There were perhaps 40 men gathered, dock hands and militia boys and a clutch of monks who really should have been praying, and they were pressing forward in that ugly half-organized way that meant no one individual had committed to violence yet, but they were all waiting for someone else to start it. "Orc filth," someone in the back shouted. "No entry, that's the law." "There is no such law," the orc woman said. Her voice was low and measured, each word placed with deliberate weight. "I have a letter of transit from the road warden at Fenpass. You are welcome to read it." "I'm welcome to burn it," the same voice called back. She did not flinch. She reached slowly into the satchel at her hip and withdrew a folded document sealed with red wax. She held it up. "Road Warden Callum Oakes, his seal, his name, his order. I'm contracted to the monastery of the High Stone as a protective guard for the duration of the autumn trade season. My name is Vola Stonefist. I am expected." The crowd's murmur shifted, not softer, but different in texture, the particular note of people who are learning something they do not like. Owen pushed through the edge of the crowd. He did not have a plan. He just knew that if he stood and watched this from the tree line, he would not sleep that night. "Let her through," he said. 40 heads turned. Not what anyone had expected from a man with wood chips in his hair. "Who in blazes are you?" the militia sergeant demanded. He was a broad man with a mustache and the particular red-faced authority of someone who was just discovering that authority had limits. "Owen Morgan, I cut wood for your furnaces. And she's right that there's no prohibition on orcs at the gate. That law was repealed 3 years ago by prior Governor Hale. His Grace was very clear about it." Owen had been present at that proclamation. He had been delivering a cord of hickory to the main hall and had heard every word of it while the guards had ignored him completely. "Read the letter." The sergeant looked at the letter. He looked at the crowd. He looked at Vola Stonefist, who looked back at him with the kind of patience that has weaponized itself into something lethal. The sergeant stepped aside. The crowd parted, not graciously, not warmly, but it parted. Vola Stonefist walked through without hurrying. When she passed Owen, she paused just briefly and looked at him with those amber eyes. He felt the weight of that look somewhere in the center of his chest. "Thank you," she said. "They were wrong," Owen said. That was all he had. She studied him for one more moment, then walked on through the gate into Ashmark. Owen stood there in the road for a while after the crowd dispersed. Then he went back down to his log and his axe, and spent the rest of the afternoon splitting wood with more force than the job really required. He did not see her again for 4 days. Those 4 days were busy ones. The autumn trade season in Ashmark was a serious affair. Merchants climbed the mountain road from the lowlands bringing grain, cloth, spiced oil, and ironwork, and they left carrying the monastery's famous stonework tiles, its medicinal herbs, and whatever else the prior governor had managed to tax into his coffers. The roads were crowded, the inns were full, and Owen's contract put him in the furnace rooms twice daily with loads of timber. He was too tired each night to think much. He slept, he rose, he cut wood. He told himself he was not thinking about the orc woman. He was extremely unsuccessful at this. He heard things, the way a man hears things when he makes enough deliveries through a busy town. Vola Stonefist had been installed in the East Garrison Tower. She was employed directly by Brother Aldrich, who managed the monastery's treasury accounts and trade ledgers. The contract was specific. She was to ensure the security of the trade season, specifically the prevention of any theft of the merchant levies that were collected by the prior governor's clerks and stored in the vault beneath the main hall. There had been incidents in the past 2 seasons. Money had gone missing, not all of it, just enough to be a problem and just neatly enough to suggest someone who knew the layout well. Owen heard this from the blacksmith's apprentice, who heard it from the garrison cook, who heard it from Brother Aldrich's own page. Ashmark was not a large town. Information moved through it like water through limestone. He delivered timber to the garrison on a Tuesday morning and found the courtyard empty, except for a practice dummy and one extremely focused orc woman who was putting a short blade through combinations he could barely track with his eyes. He set down the timber. He stood watching. He knew he should not stand watching. She reversed the blade, caught the dummy with the butt of the handle in a motion that would have dropped a man to his knees, and then stopped, perfectly still, and said without turning around, "How long have you been standing there?" "Long enough to feel embarrassed about it," Owen said honestly. She turned around. She looked at him with those amber eyes, and he had the strong sense that she was deciding something. "You spoke for me at the gate," she said. "Yes." "Why?" "Because you were right and they were wrong." He set his hands in his pockets, "and because 40 to 1 always bothered me as mathematics." The corner of her mouth moved. It was not quite a smile, but it was something in that direction. "Owen Morgan, the woodcutter. You remembered my name." "I remember everything," she said. It was not a boast, just information. She picked up the second blade from the fence rail and went back to her work. Owen finished stacking the timber and left. He spent the walk back to the forest trying to decide whether that had been a conversation or merely 2 people occupying the same courtyard. He decided it was probably both. He came back the next morning. Not with timber. That delivery was not due for 2 days. He came with nothing except a wrapped piece of bread and a clay jar of the honey that the monastery's bees made from mountain thyme. He held these objects in his hands outside the garrison gate and realized with complete clarity that he had lost his mind. He set the bread and honey just inside the gate on the stone step and walked away. When he returned that afternoon with an actual timber delivery, both items were gone, and on the step in their place was a single smooth river stone with a small spiral carved into it, the kind of mark the southern clans made to indicate a gift received. He put the stone in his coat pocket, and it lived there for months. The trade season was 3 weeks old when the first theft happened. It was not minor. 700 silver marks had been moved from the clerk's lockbox during the night. Moved, not broken into, which meant either a key or a very good copy of one. Brother Aldrich was discovered at dawn sitting on the vault room floor with his head in his hands, and by mid-morning the news had spread through every corner of Ashmark with the speed of a rumor that has ambitions. Owen heard about it from the blacksmith, same as always, and his first thought was for Vola. He was not wrong to worry. By the time he reached the upper town with his morning delivery, a small and agitated group had assembled outside the garrison tower with the militia sergeant at their head. The sergeant had the look of a man who had found a convenient explanation and was not going to let logic shake it loose. The orc was brought in right as the season started, the sergeant was saying to the group as Owen came into earshot. And right as she arrives, money goes missing. I'm not saying anything that isn't plain sense. You're saying exactly nothing that is plain sense, said Vola Stonefist from the garrison doorway. She was armored now leather cuirass over her travel bodice, the two short blades at her hips and a longer one across her back. She stood in the doorway with her arms crossed and the specific, composed fury of a woman who has been accused of things she did not do before and is not impressed by the novelty of it. Owen set down his timber by the wall and put himself between the sergeant and the doorway. Not dramatically, just physically, standing where he was standing. The sergeant stared at him. Morgan, step aside. You don't have cause, Owen said. The vault was locked, she doesn't have a key. Brother Aldrich keeps the only 2 copies. He had asked about this. In the 4 days since hearing about the contract, he had asked because he found himself thinking about what might make her situation difficult and wanting to understand it. Accusing her without evidence is not justice, it's just convenient. Vola's eyes found his from the doorway. He did not look back at her. He kept his eyes on the sergeant. The sergeant had no evidence. He had only suspicion and the particular kind of resentment that comes from a man who does not like the world changing around him. He made a sound that was not quite words and took his group back up the road. Owen turned around. Vola was looking at him with an expression he could not entirely read. Not quite the same composure as before, something working behind those amber eyes. You keep doing that, she said. Someone should. I do not need protecting, she said, and it was not said with anger, it was said as a simple statement of fact, the way someone might note that rain is wet. I know, Owen said. I wasn't protecting you, I was telling him he was wrong. Those are different things. She was quiet for a moment, then she said, come inside, there is coffee. Owen had never had coffee at the garrison before. He had never been inside the garrison tower before. He went inside. Was a spare, clean room, a table, a cot along the far wall, a brazier, and a pack that sat propped against the wall with the disciplined neatness of someone who had spent a long time being ready to move. There was a copper pot over the brazier from which extremely good-smelling coffee was producing a curl of steam. Vola poured 2 cups. She sat on one side of the table and he sat on the other. She wrapped both hands around her cup and looked at him and said, "Tell me about the vault." So he did. He told her what he knew, which was that the vault had 2 keys, one kept by Brother Aldrich and one kept in the prior governor's private office, and that both men had alibis for the night in question, and that the lock showed no sign of forced entry, and that none of the guards on night duty had seen anything. He told her what he had heard from the blacksmith about the previous 2 seasons' missing funds, which had been smaller amounts and attributed to bookkeeping errors. Vola listened without interrupting. When he finished, she said, they were not errors. No, he agreed. Someone has been doing this for 3 seasons. Someone who knows the vault, the keys, the guard rotations. She turned her cup slowly. Someone who has been here long enough to understand all of it. Half the town fits that description. Half the town does not have access to the prior governor's key. She set down the cup. I want to see the vault room. I can get you in, Owen said. Brother Aldrich trusts me. I've been delivering to his furnaces for 6 years. She looked at him. Why would you do that? Owen thought about the stone with the spiral carved into it, sitting in his pocket. Because you did not steal anything and someone who lives in this town did, and I would like to know who. She studied him for a long moment, and then she nodded once and picked up her coffee again. That was the beginning. They spent the next week doing something that was not quite an investigation and not quite a partnership, and was entirely too interesting for Owen to pretend he was uninvested in it. He got Vola into the vault room through Brother Aldrich, who was desperate enough to welcome any help and too frightened to care that the help came from an orc warrior and a woodcutter. They looked at the lock. They looked at the ledgers. They walked the guard routes at night with Vola, noting the gaps in coverage with the professional eye of someone who had planned and defended fortifications before. Owen carried timber and asked questions. He was easy to overlook, a working man in a work coat, passing through doors and rooms that guards and merchants barely registered. He listened. He collected details the way he collected fallen wood, carefully, with attention, not throwing anything away. They developed a habit of meeting in the garrison tower after his last delivery of the day. He would come with bread or cheese or something he had found at the market stalls. She would have coffee or, on the colder evenings, a small fire in the brazier. They would sit at the table and compare what they had learned, and the conversation would start with the vault and the thefts and then drift, naturally and without either of them deliberately steering it, into other territory. He learned that she was 28 years old, that she had come from the Stonefist clan, a River Valley people, smaller than the war clans, more traveled, that she had been a warrior since she was 19, mostly contracted work, guard duty, escort, the occasional mountain patrol. That she had a brother she corresponded with by letter and a mother she did not. That she had worked 11 contracts in 8 years, and this was the first one north of the Ash River. She learned that he had been born in Ashmark, that his father had been a woodcutter before him and his grandfather before that he had considered leaving twice and both times found a reason to stay that he could not explain, that he was good at being quiet and bad at pretending he did not care about things. "You care very loudly," she told him one evening, not unkindly. "Is that a problem?" She considered it. "No," she said. "It is unusual." He wanted to ask what she meant by that. Instead he said, "What do orcs do when they find something unusual?" "Depends on the orc," she said, and looked into her cup and did not say more. He thought about that for a long time afterward. The evening she told him about why she worked alone, no warband, no partner, no contract companion, she said it simply, without self-pity, the way she said most things. There had been a partner once, she said. A Stonefist woman named Kara who had been with her on a border contract 6 years ago, a contract that had gone wrong. Owen did not push for more than she offered. She did not offer much. But he understood the shape of what she was saying, that there were things that took the trust out of a person, that left them walking alone not because they could not stand company but because the cost of losing it had been too high to risk again. He said nothing useful. He said, "I'm sorry." She looked at him. "Most people tell me it was the nature of the work. Most people say that to make themselves feel better," Owen said. "Losing someone is hard. The nature of the work has nothing to do with that part." She was quiet for a while. Then she said, "You are a strange man, Owen Morgan." "I've been told," he said. "I do not mean it badly," she said, and there was something in her voice that had not been there before, something softer underneath the stone of it, and Owen felt it in his chest like a coal beginning to catch. 2 weeks into the season, someone nearly stabbed him. He was crossing the lower market at dusk, heading back toward the tree line when the blow came from the left side of an alley, quick, quiet, clearly practiced. He turned instinctively and the blade caught his coat instead of his side, a clean slice that would have opened him from hip to ribs. He grabbed the man's wrist, held it, looked at a face he did not know, and then Vola was there. He genuinely had no idea where she had come from. One moment she was not present. The next she had the man off his feet, pinned against the alley wall with one hand wrapped around his collar and both his feet dangling. The man was not small. She held him like laundry. "Name," she said. The man said nothing. She looked at Owen. "Are you hurt?" "No, just the coat." He kept his voice steady. His heart was doing something complicated. She looked back at the man. "Name," she said again. When he still said nothing, she reached into his coat with her free hand and found in the inside pocket a keyring with 2 keys on it. She held them up in the torchlight. Owen recognized the shape of one of them. He had stared at the vault lock long enough to know what its key looked like. They had found the thief. Or rather, the thief had found them first. The man's name turned out to be Declan Say, and he had been Brother Aldrich's second clerk for 4 years. He had a gambling debt in the lowlands that made the vault theft look modest, and he had a copy of the prior governor's key made by a locksmith in Veldren who had since conveniently left the country. He had seen Owen asking questions around the market. He had known it was only a matter of time. He was taken to the garrison within the hour and had confessed to everything before morning, mostly because Vola sat across the table from him for 2 hours without speaking, and he apparently found this more unnerving than actual interrogation. Brother Aldrich was so relieved he wept. The prior governor, a narrow-faced man named Governor Tallish, who Owen had spoken to precisely twice in his life, and found no more likable on the second occasion than the first, summoned them both to his hall the following morning. He told Vola that she had performed her contract admirably. He thanked Owen with the puzzled, slightly suspicious regard of a man who cannot figure out what the woodcutter was doing involved in all this. Outside on the monastery steps, in the sharp autumn air with the mountains cutting blue and white against the sky above them, Vola looked at Owen and said, "The contract is effectively concluded." Owen felt the bottom drop out of the morning. "You'll be leaving." "The season has 3 more weeks. I was contracted for the duration." She looked out at the mountains. "But after that?" "After that," he said. "I have not yet decided," she said. She looked at him, and there was that thing in her amber eyes again, the thing that looked like a question she had not yet decided whether to ask. "Where is your cabin?" He pointed down the slope toward the tree line. "Show me," she said. So he showed her. It was an honest cabin, not large, not grand, but built with care. Timber walls, a stone hearth, a loft where he slept, a workbench along the south wall where he sharpened his tools and occasionally carved things from offcuts just because he liked the way the wood felt in his hands. There was a small kitchen. There was a table by the window that looked north toward the mountain peaks. There was a chair by the hearth and a second one that he had made 2 years ago and put there for no reason he had ever been able to articulate. Vola moved through the space slowly, looking at everything. She picked up a small carved figure from the shelf above the hearth, a bird, roughly done but recognizable as a hawk. She turned it over in her hands. "You made this," she said, "when there's nothing else to do in the winter." She set it down carefully. She stood at the window and looked out at the forest. The afternoon light came through the glass and caught the edge of her jaw, the line of her cheekbone, and Owen stood by the hearth and looked at her and felt something very large and very quiet settle in him. "This is a good place," she said. "It's home," he said. She turned from the window and looked at him. There was something deliberate in the way she crossed the room, not slow, but measured, the way she moved in everything. She stopped in front of him, close enough that he could see the pale amber ring around her pupils. She was taller than him. He looked up slightly. She reached out and her hand found the front of his coat, not grabbing, just resting there, fingers curled in the wool. "Owen Morgan," she said. "Yes," he said. "Tell me something true," she said. He thought about it for 1 second. "I have not stopped thinking about you since the gate," he said. She looked at him for a long moment. Her hand was still on his coat. Then she said, "Nor I about you," and the words were quiet and certain, and then she leaned down and kissed him. It was not a gentle kiss. It was not tentative. It was the kiss of a woman who had decided something and was not going back on it, warm and sure and thorough. Owen's hands found her waist and she made a small sound in her throat and kissed him harder, and the world outside the window went on being mountains and forest and autumn light without caring at all. When they broke apart, she did not step back. She stayed close, her forehead dropping to rest on his, her breath warm against his face. 3 more weeks, she murmured. "Yes," he said. "I do not want to talk about what happens after that yet," she said. "Then we won't," he said. She lifted her head and looked at him, and there was something in her face that she was trying to keep controlled and not entirely managing. "I have not done this in a long time," she said. "Staying anywhere." "Wanting to stay." "I know," he said. His hands were still at her waist. I'm not asking you to decide anything. I know, she said, and then after a moment, that is exactly the problem. He almost laughed. She felt him almost laugh against her, and the corner of her mouth turned up, that near smile he had been cataloging for 2 weeks with increasing helplessness. She stayed for dinner. He made a simple meal, and she sat at his table, and they ate it and talked about nothing important. The merchant caravans that had come through that week, the monastery's stonework, whether the early snow on the peaks meant a hard winter or just a cool autumn. He learned that she found the sound of the wind in the pines outside his window pleasant. She learned that he made his own bread. He learned that she drank her coffee without anything in it. She learned that he had a recurring argument with a particular raven who lived in the birch stand east of the cabin. She left after dark. He walked her to the forest edge, and she turned there and looked back at him, and in the darkness her amber eyes were the most vivid thing in his view. "Tomorrow," she said. "Tomorrow," he agreed. She went back up the mountain path, and he went back inside and sat in his chair by the hearth for a very long time. The remaining 3 weeks moved the way time moves when it contains something you want both to speed toward and to make last forever. Vola had little official contract work left to do. Declan Say was in custody. The vault was double-locked with new protocols, and the trade season wound down through the lower market days with the gradually slowing energy of autumn commerce packing itself up for winter. She had her garrison room. She had her duty rotations. She had every evening. She had Owen. It became a thing they did not discuss but both knew. She came down to the cabin in the evenings. Sometimes she brought food from the garrison mess. Sometimes he had already cooked. They ate, they talked. They sat by the hearth while the wind moved in the pines outside. She was not a soft person. She was not easy or simple. She asked hard questions and expected honest answers and gave them in return. And Owen, who had spent most of his adult life talking to people who were not particularly interested in whether he had anything to say, found this extraordinarily nourishing. He told her about the years after his father died, the way the contracts had kept him busy enough not to feel the particular hollow left by a man who had taught him everything practical he knew. She listened without hurrying him. She told him about the clan marking on her bracer, that it was given to a Stonefist warrior who had completed 3 years of independent service, and that she had received it at 22 and worn it every day since. He asked if she missed the clan. She said she missed the idea of it more than the reality. He understood what she meant. One evening, about a week from the end of the season, a storm came off the mountain fast and mean, the kind that drops temperature and visibility in the same hour. Owen's cabin fireplace was working hard, and the windows were rattling in their frames. Vola was at the table with a map of the lower road spread out. She had been tracking merchant routes, still turning the Declan Say investigation over in her mind, looking for pieces that might not fit, when the storm truly broke and the path up to Ashmark became a churning mess of sleet and darkness. "You cannot go back up in that," Owen said. She looked at the window. "No," she agreed, with the lack of dramatics of someone who assesses situations rather than dramatizes them. There was one bed in the loft. Owen made this fact plain by showing her the loft with the complete absence of coyness about it, and then pointing out the chair by the hearth where he intended to sleep, which was deep and cushioned and had served him before on late nights. Vola came down from the loft and stood at the top of the ladder and looked at him. "Owen, yes, you do not have to sleep in the chair." He held very still. "Vola, I am not—" She stopped, started again. She looked at him with an expression that was as close to uncertain as he had seen from her, and it moved him the way her certainty never had, precisely because it was so rare. "I am not suggesting anything I do not want," she said. "I want to be very clear about that." "You are extremely clear," he said, and she came down the ladder. That night began with warmth and conversation by the fire and became, gradually and inevitably, something more. Owen did not rush it. He had no intention of rushing anything where Vola Stonefist was concerned. He sat beside her on the hearthrug, and they talked quietly while the storm hammered the roof. And at some point, their hands found each other. And at some point, the conversation wound down to something that did not need words. He kissed her and she kissed him back with that same certainty she did everything, her hands in his hair, and the fire burned down low and the storm outside went on being itself. Later, much later, with the storm still muttering at the roof but softer now, she slept. She was facing away from him, curled slightly into herself in the way of a person who was accustomed to sleeping alone and had not quite unlearned it. She was deeply asleep, her breathing slow, her hands loose. Owen lay awake for a while, not because he could not sleep, but because he was awake in the particular way of someone who knows they are living inside a moment they want to remember. He did not know how it happened. He was not sure she knew either. At some point in the deep middle of the night she turned, and when she turned her face found his shoulder and her body arranged itself along his side with the unhurried instinct of something sleeping. He felt her breath against his neck. He felt the weight of her arm across his chest. He did not move. He lay there with the fire low and the storm quiet and the forest dark and enormous outside the window, and he breathed. She slept. She slept fully, deeply, without the guard up that he had felt in every room he had ever seen her in, that watchful quality that she wore like armor. She slept like someone who, for just this stretch of dark and firelight, was not afraid of what she would find when she woke. He lay awake a long time being something he could not name, that was not happiness exactly, but was much larger than contentment. She woke before dawn slowly, the way she always did, not with a start but with a gradual assembling of herself. He felt the moment she registered the shoulder under her face and the arm across the chest, and the fact that she had slept without waking once. He felt the stillness of her discovering it. He said nothing. He waited. She lifted her head and looked at him in the dark. He could see her eyes, the amber of them catching the last coal glow from the hearth. "How long?" she said quietly. "Most of the night," he said. She looked at him for a long moment, and he had learned enough of her face to read what was moving across it, the surprise, and something behind the surprise that was not comfortable, and behind that something she was not going to name out loud but that sat in her eyes very plainly. "I do not sleep near people," she said. "I know," he said. "I have not." She stopped. Started again, and what struck him was that she did not look away from him. "I have not slept like that in years." "I know," he said again softly. "You held very still," she said. "I didn't want to wake you." She looked at him. Something in her face shifted, and it was not a small shift. It was the kind of thing that moves deep before it shows on the surface. She reached out and her hand found his face, palm against his jaw, and she was warm from sleep, and she looked at him with her amber eyes and she said, very quietly, "Owen." "I'm right here," he said. She kissed him then, and it was different from the kisses before, not with urgency, not with decision, but with something that felt like arriving somewhere. He held her face in both hands and kissed her back the same way. Outside, the storm had gone. The first gray light of morning was beginning to define the shape of the pines through the window. It smelled like snow and wood smoke, and he had her in his arms in his own cabin, and the world was very simple and very good. She did not pretend it had not happened. She did not make it smaller by handling it lightly. She lay with her head on his shoulder for a while as the light grew, and she said, "I think I have been trying not to need anything for a long time." "I think that's probably exhausting," he said. She made a sound that might have been a laugh. "It is," she said, "extremely." "You do not have to do it here," he said, "not with me." She was quiet for a while. Then she said, "I know." And it was the same way she said the things she was completely certain of. The last week of the season arrived and then it was gone, the way things go when you are paying attention to something else. The merchants departed. The roads emptied. Ashmark settled into its autumn self quieter, the upper gates locked at dusk, the monastery fires burning all night against the cold. Vola's contract officially ended on the last market day. She came down to the cabin that evening with her pack. Owen opened the door and saw the pack over her shoulder and said nothing. She came inside and set the pack down by the door and sat at the table, and he made coffee. They sat across from each other and she said, "I was going to go south." "Were," he said. "Were," she confirmed. She looked at him. "I want to stay." He put his hands on the table. He made himself breathe evenly. "For the winter. I don't know how long," she said. "I don't know how to know, but I know I do not want to be south of the Ash River when the snow comes." She paused. "I know I do not want to sleep somewhere that is not here." He said, "Then stay." "It is not simple," she said. "Your town does not want me." "Some of my town," he corrected. "The prior governor owes you. Brother Aldrich thinks you are the finest thing that has happened to Ashmark in a decade. And you are good with an axe, which is something I can work with professionally." She looked at him. "You are not taking this seriously." "I am taking it more seriously than I have taken anything," he said. "I just know what I want, and I am telling you clearly. Stay. Stay as long as it makes sense. Stay until it doesn't, but stay." She was quiet for a long time. She drank her coffee. She looked at him with those amber eyes. "There is something else," she said. "I heard something today, in the garrison." He waited. "Declan Say is claiming he worked for someone, that the thefts were contracted, that someone hired him to do it, someone still in Ashmark." She set down the cup. "The garrison sergeant thinks he is inventing it to bargain for a lighter sentence." "But you don't," Owen said. "Declan Say was a meticulous man," she said. "The key copy was precise. The amounts taken were always amounts that could be blamed on error. Someone planned this carefully. Someone who understood not just the vault but the politics of Ashmark well enough to predict what would be blamed on what." She paused. "Someone who expected me to be the obvious suspect and was counting on that." Owen felt the cold slide of that. "They brought you here knowing you could be the scapegoat. Or someone manipulated the contract process to ensure I was selected." "Yes." He thought about it. "Who arranged the contract? Who selected you specifically?" Vola said. "The request went through the prior governor's office. His secretary arranged the outreach to the road warden at Fenpass." Owen said. "Who is the prior governor's secretary?" Vola said. "A man named Harlow Brent. He has held the position for 7 years." Owen said, "I delivered timber to Harlow Brent's private office 3 times this season, and he was never there, which is unusual because secretaries generally live at their desks." They looked at each other across the table. "We need to be careful," Vola said. "If Brent is behind this, he still has influence in the prior governor's house. If we move too fast—" "Then we move right," Owen said. "What do you need?" she thought. "I need Declan Say's full testimony, not what the garrison has written down, what he actually said in detail. He was talking to the garrison clerk this morning. Your blacksmith friend might know someone." "Give me tomorrow morning," Owen said. She looked at him. "You are a woodcutter." "I am a woodcutter who has been delivering to every room in this town for 6 years and who nobody looks at twice," Owen said. "That has uses." She looked at him for a long moment, and then something happened in her face, a warmth, deep and sudden and unguarded. "Yes," she said softly, "it does." He reached across the table and covered her hand with his. She turned her hand over and held his. Owen's morning produced what it needed to produce. The garrison clerk's copy boy knew Owen from the furnace room deliveries, and the copy boy was the kind of young man who found the story of the vault theft extremely compelling and had memorized most of Declan Say's testimony in the way that young men memorize exciting things. By noon, Owen had the essential details. Declan Say had named no name out loud, but he had described his contractor as a man who wore the prior governor's seal on his correspondence, who communicated only in writing, and who had arranged for Vola's specific contract application to be elevated above other candidates, specifically so that, when the money went missing, the newest and most visibly foreign addition to Ashmark's staff would be the natural focus of suspicion. He brought this to Vola, and she laid it beside the notes she had already compiled, and together they built the picture clearly. Harlow Brent had been running a systematic drain on the vault for 3 years. He had tried to retire the risk by manufacturing a scapegoat in the form of an orc warrior hired for precisely 1 season. He had not counted on Vola being both competent and on speaking terms with the one man in Ashmark who went everywhere unnoticed. They went to Brother Aldrich, who went to the prior governor, who was so horrified that his own secretary had been robbing him that he summoned Harlow Brent to the main hall that same afternoon. Owen was not in the hall for that. But Vola was, standing at the right hand of the prior governor as Harlow Brent walked in and saw her and went gray. Brent tried 3 things in rapid sequence. He denied everything, then he blamed Declan Say for everything, then he tried to run, which was where things went wrong for him because he ran directly through the main hall's east door into the monastery courtyard, which was full of people because the afternoon market bell had just rung, and Vola went after him. Owen was in the courtyard delivering the last timber bundle of the season when the east door crashed open, and Harlow Brent came through it at speed, and 4 seconds later Vola Stonefist came through it after him. She crossed the courtyard in a flat run, the crowd scattering, and she was faster than Brent by a margin that was not close. She caught him at the courtyard center at the base of the old fountain where the merchants gathered to argue prices, and she put him on the ground. The courtyard was full of people. They had all stopped. Owen, standing at the edge with his timber bundle, watched as Vola pinned Harlow Brent's wrist behind his back, put her knee in the center of his back, and looked up at the crowd with her amber eyes absolutely calm. The crowd was very quiet. Then Brother Aldrich came through the door, and then 2 of the prior governor's actual guards, and then Governor Tallish himself, and the silence broke into noise. Owen put down his timber and walked to the center of the courtyard. He stood beside Vola. She looked up at him from where she was kneeling and said without any particular inflection, "Good afternoon." "Good afternoon," he said. She stood up. The guards took Brent. The crowd stared. Owen stood next to Vola in the middle of Ashmark's busiest courtyard, and the winter light came off the stone walls in long gold lines, and he was perfectly, completely happy. But that was not the end of it. Harlow Brent, it turned out, had associates in Ashmark, not criminal associates, but the kind of social debt that powerful men accumulate over 7 years. People who owed him favors or feared what he knew about them. In the week following his arrest, while he sat in the garrison lockup awaiting transfer to the Lowland courts, a quiet campaign began. Not violent, something sneakier and in some ways worse. The word went around that Vola had framed Brent, that she and the woodcutter had manufactured the evidence against the secretary as cover for her own guilt, that the real thief had gotten away with it by using an innocent man, and wasn't it interesting how the orc woman was now staying in the woodcutter's cabin? Nobody could find anyone willing to say this to Owen's face or Vola's face, but it moved through the market stalls and the inn's common room and the monastery's lesser halls in the way that lies move when they have a comfortable temperature. Owen heard it on a Tuesday and went home seething. Vola heard it the same day and was quieter about it, which was worse. That evening she sat at his table and she was still, and he knew the stillness for what it was, the particular quiet of a woman who has decided to leave before she is removed. "You are thinking about going," he said. She looked up, said nothing. "Vola, I am thinking," she said carefully, "that my presence here is costing you. My reputation with people I do not respect has never been something I valued highly," he said. "They will not give you contracts," she said. "They will make your work harder. Let them." "Owen, I heard you tell me that you want to stay," he said. "I heard that. I am telling you that nothing that has happened since then has changed what I want, which is you here at this table for as long as you want to be here. If some men with grudges and small minds want to make my mornings harder, I will have my mornings harder, and I will still be glad of the evenings." He looked at her across the table. "Do not make that decision for me." She was quiet for a long time. The fire popped and settled. Outside, the first snow of the season was making its quiet way down through the pines. "I am not very easy to live with," she said. "I have noticed," he said. "I find it suits me extremely well." The corner of her mouth moved, the almost smile. He had long since stopped cataloging it. It was just part of the landscape of his life now, like the sound of wind in the pines and the smell of coffee in the mornings. "I need to clear our names," she said. "Properly, not just Brent in the garrison. The people talking, I need them to have nothing left to talk about." "Then we clear them," he said. "How?" She thought about it for several days. Owen went on working. He delivered timber. He answered the questions people asked him directly, which were fewer than usual, because some of them were embarrassed, and some of them were waiting, and he did not pretend anything was simpler than it was. What Vola came up with was this: a petition to the prior governor, signed by every merchant who had been in Ashmark for the full trade season, requesting a formal public review of the investigation, the evidence, and the verdicts. The merchants had more interest than anyone in the vault security being real. It was their levies at stake. And merchants, as a class, were less interested in local prejudice than in whether the money was safe. Most of them had watched Vola work. Most of them had formed opinions about what competent looked like. She drafted the petition with a careful hand and spent a week gathering signatures. Owen helped where he could, which mostly meant carrying the thing to places she could not go without causing a scene, and explaining the situation to men who found her presence alarming, but who trusted a working man's read of the facts. They got 31 signatures. The prior governor, who was himself still embarrassed about Brent, and who had noticed that the source of most of the slanderous rumor was a group of men who had shared suppers with Brent for years, and who he now regarded with great suspicion, granted the review. The review was held in the main hall on a gray November morning with most of Ashmark present, because there was not much else of interest happening, and because the community of Ashmark had, at some level, been waiting for someone to resolve the question of what had actually happened. The prior governor sat at the high table. Brother Aldrich presented the accounts. The garrison clerk read Declan Say's testimony. The road warden from Fenpass had sent a letter, carried by express rider, confirming the legitimate nature of Vola's contract and the integrity of the hiring process before Brent had interfered with it. 3 merchants gave testimony about what they had personally observed during the trade season. Vola stood at the left end of the room through all of it, in her travel leathers with her blades at her hips, and did not move and did not look at anyone in particular. Owen stood beside her. He was not there as a witness. His part of the testimony had already been read into the record. He was just standing there. He had been asked by no one to stand there. He stood there because she was standing there. The prior governor delivered his finding in the flat, formal language of official things. Harlow Brent was confirmed as the sole architect of the vault thefts. Declan Say was confirmed as an accomplice. The case against Vola Stonefist was formally closed with a finding of complete innocence. The slander that had been circulating was identified, in the carefully modulated language of governors who do not like scandal, as without foundation. The hall was quiet after he finished speaking. Then Brother Aldrich, who had been sitting at the side of the high table with an expression of building determination, stood up. He was a small man, Brother Aldrich, with round glasses and ink permanently on his left hand. He was not a dramatic person, but he stood up and he said, in a voice that carried to every corner of the hall, "Ashmark owes Vola Stonefist an apology, and I will say plainly that I am ashamed it took this proceeding to make that clear. She was brought here to protect us. She did so. We treated her with suspicion and hostility from the moment she arrived, and she did her work anyway, and it was done with more integrity than this town deserved." He looked around the hall. "I am personally grateful. I hope others are as well." The silence that followed was long and specific. Vola, beside Owen, said nothing. He looked at her and saw that her jaw was tight and that she was holding very still, and he thought he understood why. He reached over and found her hand and took it. She gripped his hand so hard it hurt and did not let go. There were people in that hall, not all of them, not even most of them, but some, who saw that and looked at the floor. Some who looked away. And some who did not look away at all, who saw 2 people standing in the middle of the main hall of Ashmark holding onto each other after a hard autumn, and who understood what they were looking at. The garrison sergeant, to his credit, was one of them. He crossed the hall after the prior governor adjourned, and he stood in front of Vola with his red-faced authority considerably diminished, and he said, "I was wrong at the gate." Vola looked at him. "I was wrong," he said again. "That's all. Vola said. Yes, you were. And then, after a pause, thank you for saying it. The sergeant nodded and went away. It was not a great moment of reconciliation. It was not a speech or a transformation. It was just a man saying he had been wrong in front of people and meaning it. Owen thought it was more valuable than a speech would have been. The hall emptied. Owen and Vola walked out through the monastery's main door into the November air, into the courtyard where the fountain was beginning to freeze at its edges and the mountain above Ashmark was white all the way to the tree line. She stopped in the middle of the courtyard and let go of his hand and turned to face him. I wanted to cry in there, she said. It was not a confession. It was information, delivered with the matter-of-fact honesty she gave everything. I know, he said. I did not, she said. I know, he said again. I have not cried since Kara, she said. Owen was quiet. He looked at her. I thought it meant something was gone, she said. I thought I had run out of it. And now? He said. She looked at him, and those amber eyes were very bright in the cold air. And now, I think I was wrong about that too, she said. He crossed the distance between them and put his arms around her, and she let him, which was not a small thing. She let him hold her in the middle of the courtyard of Ashmark where anyone who walked by could see, and she buried her face in his shoulder and she breathed. And she did not cry, but she held on to him the way she had held his hand in the hall with her whole strength, and Owen held her right back. The cold wind moved across the stones. Somewhere above them, a bell rang the midday hour. The mountains stood where they had always stood, enormous and indifferent and beautiful. He held her for a long time. She lifted her head eventually and stepped back and looked at him with composure reconstructed, but something behind it that she was not trying to hide anymore. Come home, he said. Yes, she said. Let's go home. They walked down through the east gate together, through the lower market where people were beginning to pack up the late morning stalls, past the blacksmith's forge and the garrison wall and the last of the town's stone buildings, down the path into the trees, to his cabin at the forest edge. That evening he made a fire, and she made coffee, and they sat at the table across from each other, and she told him things she had not told him before, about the Stonefist clan in the river valleys, about summers when she was young, about a scar on her left forearm that she had had since she was 19 and the first contract that had gone badly before she had been good enough to prevent it. He told her about the years when his father was dying and Owen had been cutting wood alone and learning what it meant to do something physical and tiring every day just to fill the hours with something real. They talked until the fire was low. She went to the loft. He followed. She was a complicated person, and she would always be a complicated person, and Owen had no desire for any simplified version of her. He wanted the hard edges and the long silences and the way she moved through a room like she had already decided its geometry. He wanted the almost smile and the amber eyes and the way she said things simply and meant them completely. He wanted her. All of it. He had been clear about this to himself for some time. He thought she was beginning to trust that. Something shifted in the days that followed the review. Not in any dramatic way. Ashmark did not transform overnight. There were still people who looked at her warily. The prior governor was civil but not warm. A handful of the militia boys who had been at the gate that first day had the decency to look embarrassed when they passed her on the road. Most of the merchants were gone for the winter. But Brother Aldrich invited her to the monastery's harvest supper, and she went and sat at the long table and ate monastery bread, and spoke to a curious young monk about the geography of the Ash River valleys. And Owen sat beside her and watched her talk, and thought his heart might actually be too full for the amount of chest it was expected to occupy. The blacksmith's apprentice asked Owen, somewhat awkwardly, whether Vola would be willing to look at the garrison's defensive formation for a coin, because the blacksmith's apprentice had ambitions of becoming a guardsman, and had decided that Vola Stonefist was the best tactical mind he had ever encountered, and he would like some of it to rub off on him. Owen asked her. She said yes, with the slight air of someone who was surprised to be asked but not displeased. She spent an afternoon with the apprentice. whose name was Tam, in the upper courtyard, going through stances and formations while Tam took notes with total earnestness. Owen watched from the timber pile where he was working and tried to look like he was paying attention to the wood. One evening she was sharpening her long blade at his table and he was carving something from an offcut. He had started a second hawk and was not satisfied with the proportion of the wings, and she looked up at him and said, "My brother writes that the clan is in the Winter Valley." Owen set down his knife. "Is that near here? 3 days south, the Ash River Bend. Have you written back?" "Not yet." She looked at the blade. "I told him in my last letter that I had taken a contract in Ashmark. I did not tell him the rest." "What is the rest?" Owen said, though he knew perfectly well what the rest was. She looked at him. "Do you want to tell him?" he said. She thought about it, which meant she took it seriously. "Yes," she said finally. "I want to tell him I have found somewhere I want to stay, that I have found someone." She paused. "He will ask questions." "He sounds like a reasonable person," Owen said. "He will want to meet you," she said. "I would like to meet him," Owen said. He meant it. She looked at him for a moment. Then she went back to the blade. "I will write tomorrow," she said. "He will be pleased. He has been telling me for years that I work too much." "He is right," Owen said. "You are both insufferable," she said, and the blade caught the firelight and she was not hiding the smile this time. He put down the carving and leaned across the table and kissed her, and she made that sound in her throat and kissed him back, and the carving sat unfinished on the table, and the fire crackled, and outside the snow was coming in off the mountain again, and everything was exactly as it should be. But there was one more thing still to happen, one more thread that had not yet been pulled to its end. Harlow Brent was transferred to the Lowland Courts in late November, which meant a 2-day journey down the mountain road with a garrison escort. Owen was not part of this. He was a woodcutter. He had no official role in anything. He found out about the transfer from Tam, the blacksmith's apprentice, who mentioned it while watching Vola run a sparring session in the monastery courtyard on a Tuesday morning. Vola was fighting the garrison champion. This had come about because the garrison champion, a man named Duroc, who was large and proud and had been the undisputed best fighter in Ashmark for 11 years, and had feelings about this, had made the mistake of saying at the harvest supper that he was happy to respect the orc woman's investigative work, but that her reputation as a warrior was probably exaggerated. He had said this in front of 6 people, including Tam, who had immediately reported it to Vola with the gleeful energy of someone who knows a disaster is coming and has good seats for it. Vola had not gone looking for Duroc. But when Duroc had come to the upper courtyard on Tuesday morning to continue his practice and found her already there, he had made the further mistake of saying, in front of the dozen soldiers who had gathered, that she could have the courtyard when she was done playing at it. Owen was late to arrive because he had been on the lower road with a timber delivery. He came through the upper gate at a run. Tam had sent a boy to get him, and found the courtyard arranged into a rough circle with 30 people packed 3 deep along the monastery wall, the morning light striking down cold and clear, and Duroc and Vola in the center of it. They had wooden practice weapons, the standard garrison sparring tools. Duroc was large and skilled, and had 11 years of this courtyard behind him. He was also, Owen could see at a glance, making the foundational error of believing what he expected to see rather than what was in front of him. Owen pushed to the front of the crowd. Duroc came in hard and fast, and Vola wasn't there. She moved to his outside in a quarter of a breath and used his momentum to redirect him, and the first pass ended with Duroc stumbling and the crowd making a sound. Duroc reset. He came again, more controlled, and she met him and drove him back 3 steps and then slipped under his guard and put the wooden blade at his throat. It lasted perhaps 4 seconds. Duroc stepped back. "Lucky," he said. The crowd did not agree with this characterization based on its noise. Duroc came at her a 3rd time with everything he had. He was good. Owen watched and could see it. The man was genuinely skilled, with the kind of speed and strength that had made him champion for a reason. Vola let him come. She gave him what he thought was an opening on the left. Owen could see her doing it, could see the calculation in her body, how still her left side was while her right stayed live. And when Duroc committed, she closed the opening and turned his strike and stepped inside his guard and put him on the ground. The crowd erupted. Duroc was on his back in the frozen mud of the monastery courtyard with Vola's wooden blade touching the center of his chest, and the sound coming from 30 people in a walled space was enormous, not cruel, not jeering, but genuine and shocked and thrilled. The sound of a crowd that has just seen something that exceeded what it thought was possible. Owen found himself shouting. He had not entirely planned to. He cupped his hands around his mouth and shouted, and the sound came back off the monastery walls, and he did not feel the least bit embarrassed. Vola lowered the practice blade. She reached down and offered Duroc her hand. He took it. He was a man who had real pride, which meant he had the kind that could absorb a real defeat, and she pulled him to his feet. Duroc looked at her. "That's a clean win," he said, not gracious exactly, but honest. "Yes," she said. "Rematch when you're willing," he said. She said, "Name the day." The crowd had not dispersed. It was pressing close with the particular energy of people who have witnessed something they want to talk about and need to process out loud immediately. Owen pushed through it to where she stood, and she saw him coming, and her expression shifted into something warm and privately amused. "You were late," she said. "I was on the lower road," he said. "How long did it take?" "3 passes," she said. "I saw 2, he said. "The first one was very short," she said. He laughed. She looked at him, and her almost smile was fully a smile now, out in the open in the monastery courtyard in front of 30 people, and he did not care at all who was watching. He stepped close and put his hand at her waist, and she turned toward him with that smile, and it was the most beautiful thing in Ashmark, which was already not a place without beautiful things. Tam appeared at Owen's elbow. "She absolutely destroyed him," Tam said, in the voice of a man who has witnessed a religious experience. "I see that," Owen said. "The sergeant saw the whole thing," Tam said. "He is reconsidering his opinion on quite a few matters, I think." "Good," Owen said. Vola looked at Owen with the quiet warmth that she saved for him and only him, and said, in a voice low enough that Tam would not hear it, "Come and find me later." "Always," he said. She went to return the practice weapons. The crowd broke into smaller conversations, all of them loud. Owen stood in the courtyard while the November morning settled around him. The monastery walls pale gold in the early light, the mountains above Ashmark white and enormous and permanent, and he stood there for a moment just existing inside the fact of his life, which had become much larger than it had been in September. That evening the snow came in earnest. He heard it on the roof while he was at the table with the off-cut carving. He had gotten the wings right this time, finally, and was working on the tail. Vola was at the other end of the table with a letter she was writing to her brother, her head bent over the page, her careful handwriting moving steadily from right to left the way the Southern clan script went. The firelight caught the angle of her jaw. She was wearing her travel leathers, as she always did. She had washed them and dried them by the fire and put them back on with the practical approach to clothing of someone who trusts what she knows works. The laces of the bodice were replaced with fresh cord she had found at the market, slightly darker than the old ones, and Owen had noticed this in the way he noticed everything about her. She was beautiful. She had always been beautiful. He was no longer surprised by the fact of it, but he had not stopped noticing it, and he did not think he would. She looked up from the letter and caught him looking and said, "What?" "Nothing," he said. She looked at him. "You are doing it again." "Doing what? Looking at me like that," she said. "I will try to stop," he said. "Do not," she said quietly, and went back to the letter. He kept carving. The snow came down, the fire settled, the cabin was warm. She finished the letter and sealed it and set it aside. She reached across the table and took the half-finished carving from his hands and turned it, examining it critically. "Better," she said. "The wings were wrong before," he said. "They were," she agreed. She set it back down carefully. "My brother will come north in the spring," she said. "He says he has been meaning to see the mountain roads for years." "He is welcome here," Owen said. "He will drive you mad," she said. "He asks questions constantly." "I like questions," Owen said. You are going to be extremely good friends, and it is going to be terrible, she said, and it was said with a fondness so unguarded that Owen set down his knife just to have a moment to absorb it. Vola, he said. Yes, she said. I love you, he said. He had not planned to say it in quite this way over a carving on a Tuesday evening with snow on the roof, but it was the truest thing in him and it wanted out. She was very still. She looked at him across the table with the firelight between them, and she was still in the way she was still when something had struck deep and she was deciding how to meet it. I know, she said, and then, I love you. She said it with the same directness she gave everything, no decoration, no qualification. Just the truth set down firmly. I have been working up to saying it for several weeks, she added, with the slight self-directed irony that appeared in her sometimes and always delighted him. You got there first. I have no patience, he said. You have infinite patience, she said. It is one of the things I found most unsettling about you initially. And now, he said, now I find it extremely convenient, she said, and stood from the table and came around to his side, and he turned his chair to face her, and she sat on the edge of the table in front of him, close, and cupped his face in both her hands and looked at him. I am going to be difficult, she said. I know, he said. I do not always know how to say things, she said. I will sometimes be too quiet, I will sometimes be too much. I know all of this, he said. His hands found her hips. I am in love with all of it. I was going to say that I wasn't planning on it, but I was absolutely planning on it, from approximately the gate. She looked at him. Something shifted in her face, the last guard down, fully, nothing behind it anymore. She kissed him, slowly and completely. He held her and she kissed him, and the snow went on falling outside and the fire went on burning, and the carved hawk on the table waited patiently with its new wings. Later, much later, upstairs in the loft with the snow muffling everything outside into a deep and padded quiet, she curled against him in the dark and slept. He lay awake, one hand resting on her back, and felt her breathe. He thought about the morning a month ago when he had woken to find her face on his shoulder, the absolute trust of that unconscious turning, the weight of her arm across his chest. He had not told her that it had been one of the best moments of his life. He had not wanted to make it strange by saying so, but he kept it the way he kept the stone with the spiral, the way he kept everything she gave him. She slept without guard, without the watchful quality, without the armor. She slept like she was home. He closed his eyes and the snow fell and the mountain stood outside and the fire burned low and the world was quiet and good. Morning came gray and white and clean. Owen woke first. The snow had piled on the window ledge during the night, and the light coming through the glass was the soft, diffuse light of a world covered in white. He lay still, not wanting to disturb the weight of her against his side, the warmth of her. She woke on her own a few minutes later, the same way she always did, gradual, deliberate assembling. She lifted her head and looked at him and said, "It snowed a great deal." "Yes," he said. She looked at the window. She looked at him. She set her head back down on his shoulder and did not get up. He put his arm around her. She was warm and solid and real. He felt her breathe. "I will need to clear the path," he said. "In a while," she said. "In a while," he agreed. They stayed there while the morning light grew and the snow world outside held its enormous quiet, and Vola Stonefist lay with her head on Owen Morgan's shoulder, and neither of them needed anything else from the world, not yet, not for a while. When they finally came downstairs, she made coffee and he cleared the path to the wood pile, working through the deep snow with the long-handled shovel while she stood in the doorway with both cups and watched him. He could feel her watching. He shoveled faster than strictly necessary, for reasons he chose not to examine. She handed him his cup when he came back inside and stamped the snow from his boots, and he took it and drank, and she said, "Brother Aldrich sent a message yesterday. The prior governor wants to extend a standing security contract for the spring season. The trade road opens in March." He looked at her. "You would be employed here, officially." "Officially," she said. Through the monastery, she looked at her cup. "It is not clan work. It is not what I was trained for exactly. But it is honest work and it is here." She looked at him. "If you think that makes sense." "I think it makes perfect sense," he said. "You are not just saying that," she said. It was not a question. "I never just say things," he said. She looked at him and nodded once with the decisiveness of someone who has thought this through and found it sound. "Then I will tell Brother Aldrich yes," she said. "Good," he said. "And I will write to my brother that he should come north when the pass clears," she said. "Also good," he said. And she said and then paused, and it was one of those pauses that carries something heavy in it. "And I will tell him that I have somewhere I live now, that I have someone." He set down his cup. He crossed the kitchen and stood in front of her, and she looked up at him, which always delighted something in him because she was tall and he was not, and the few inches she had on him only showed when they were this close, and he said, "Tell him he is welcome at his sister's home any time." She looked at him. "His sister's home," she said. "This cabin," Owen said simply. "Yours as much as mine if you want it." She held his gaze for a long time. Then she said, "I want it." And her voice had the quiet, absolute certainty in it of the things she said when she was completely sure. He kissed her forehead. She reached up and wrapped her arms around his neck and held on. They stood like that in his kitchen, their kitchen, while the white winter morning pressed against the windows, and the coffee went warm between their cups, and the mountains above Ashmark stood where they had always stood. In the spring, when the pass cleared and the trade roads opened, and the merchant caravans began their seasonal climb back up the mountain, Ashmark woke to something different from the previous year. The security contract was posted at the main gate formally with the monastery's seal. Vola Stonefist, Chief of Trade Security, retained by the prior governor's office. It was not a small thing. It was not a quiet thing. It was there in writing on the gate where every merchant and pilgrim and traveler who climbed the mountain could read it. Tam, who had graduated to junior guardsman over the winter, had painted the sign himself. Owen was delivering the first timber of the season when the spring caravans came through the east gate, and he set down his load and stood at the side of the road and watched. Vola was at the gate, not in the same battered position she had been in last autumn, cornered by a crowd, but at the gate because it was her post. She checked papers. She directed traffic. She answered questions with the brisk efficiency that had made her the most respected person in the garrison by February. The militia boys who had been in that original crowd were now, most of them, the same militia boys who took their assignments from her, and they did so with the lack of friction of people who had adjusted to the evidence. One of the first spring merchants, a round-faced man from the lowlands with a bright red wagon, stopped at the gate and looked at Vola and said, in the manner of someone presenting a potential problem, "The gate is kept by an orc." Vola said, "The gate is kept by the monastery of the High Stones Chief of Trade Security. Your papers, please." The merchant looked at the papers in his hand. He looked at the sign on the gate. He looked at Vola. He handed over his papers. Owen, 20 yards away by the timber pile, grinned so hard it hurt. That evening they sat at the table that was neither his nor hers but theirs, with the spring light coming through the window at a new angle, warmer, longer, reaching further into the cabin than the winter light had managed. Vola's letter from her brother sat on the corner of the table with its reply half-drafted next to it. Owen's new carving, he had started something more ambitious. A pair of hawks was at the other end. Between them were 2 plates and the last of the bread from the week's baking and a jar of mountain honey. "He will arrive next month," Vola said about her brother. "He has been in the river valley all winter and is restless." "The spare room is ready," Owen said. He had built one over the winter, adding onto the cabin's east side with timber from his own yard. He had taken his time with it. He had made it good. Vola looked at him. "You built that room very quickly for a man who claims not to rush things." "I rush the right things," he said. She was smiling. Actually smiling, not the almost smile, the real one, the one he had spent an autumn and a winter earning. It was extraordinary. He would never be finished being astonished by it. "Owen," she said. "Yes." "This spring," she said. "And the summer after." He looked at her. "I am staying," she said. Clearly, simply. The way she said everything she meant completely. I want you to know that I am not thinking about the next contract or the next road or the next place. I am here. This is where I am." He put his hand on the table and she put her hand on top of his. "I know," he said. "I'm not going anywhere either." The spring evening came through the window and laid itself across the table between them, warm and golden and unhurried. And outside the forest was beginning to green, and the mountain road was filling with the first travelers of the season, and Ashmark above them was waking up to a spring with Vola Stonefist at its gate and Owen Morgan in his cabin at the tree line, and everything was as it should be. The window was open. He could hear the pines. She squeezed his hand and he squeezed back, and they sat there in the light, together and entirely at home. And the world outside was wide and hard and full of roads she had already traveled, and roads neither of them had walked yet. And none of it was frightening, because they would walk them the same way they did everything now together, and sure of each other and glad.